Jimmy Hoffa walks into a small brick house on a quiet residential street in northwest Detroit, and Frank Sheeran is a half step behind him with a gun inside his coat. It is the afternoon of July 30th, 1975, and the air outside is somewhere near 90 degrees. The house is supposed to be full of men, a sit-down, a peace meeting. The two bosses who can end the war Hoffa is about to start over the union he built. But the rooms are empty. Hoffa feels it a half-second too late. He turns back toward the door, and that half-second is the whole story. Sheeran raises the gun and fires twice into the back of his head. Close, but not too close, because up close the blood comes back at you. Jimmy Hoffa goes down in the front hall. Sheeran sets the pistol on the body and walks out into the heat. That is the version tens of millions of people believe. It is the version a great American film carved into stone, and it is the version an old man told into a microphone, near the end of his life, the reels turning slow while he described the exact angle of the shots. There was just one problem. The men who actually worked Jimmy Hoffa's murder, the agents who spent years building the federal file, never once put Frank Sheeran in that house. The name in their memo belonged to somebody else, a man the movie gave a bit part, a pair of glasses, and a couple of lines. The version you have not heard is the one written down by the people who were trying to solve it. 15 years before he became the most famous murder confession in America, Frank Sheeran was a truck driver hauling sides of beef who had never fired a shot outside of a war. He was a big man, 6'4", Irish out of Derby, Pennsylvania, and he came home from more than 400 days of combat in Europe with a talent for following orders that most men could not stomach. He drifted into the orbit of a quiet Pennsylvania boss named Russell Bufalino, ran errands, broke the occasional head, and eventually got himself a union charter. President of Teamsters Local 326 in Wilmington, Delaware. On paper, a labor official. In practice, a man who did favors for people who could not be seen doing them. Here is what the record actually says about Frank Sheeran and the law. In 1980, the federal government convicted him of labor racketeering and sent him away for 32 years. That is the crime the state proved. Not the murder of Jimmy Hoffa, not the murder of anyone. In his entire life, Frank Sheeran was never charged with killing a single human being. Keep that in mind, because we are coming back to the file, and to the name that is actually on it. The man he claimed to have killed was, for a stretch of the 1960s, one of the most powerful people in the United States, who never held elected office. James Riddle Hoffa ran the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, more than 2 million members, a union with its hand on the throat of every truck route in the country. Nothing moved in America without the Teamsters, and for a while, the Teamsters did not move without Jimmy Hoffa. He came up hard, he fought dirty, and he treated the union pension fund like a bank for men who did not use banks. That last part is what tied his life to the men who would end it. In 1967, the government finally landed a punch that stuck. Hoffa went to federal prison for jury tampering and fraud, a 13-year sentence, and from inside Lewisburg Penitentiary, he watched other men run his union. One of those men was a New Jersey Teamster boss and Genovese family captain named Anthony Provenzano. They called him Tony Pro. Hoffa and Tony Pro had once been allies. In prison, they became something else. The story that comes down through the federal record is that the two of them fought, viciously, over a pension Provenzano felt he was owed, and that Provenzano told Hoffa to his face he would kill him, and threatened his grandchildren for good measure. Two men in prison khakis, screaming about money, planting the seed of everything that came after. In December of 1971, President Nixon commuted Hoffa's sentence and let him walk out. But the release came with a leash. Hoffa was barred from union activity until 1980. He was supposed to disappear quietly into retirement. Jimmy Hoffa had never done anything quietly in his life. He wanted his union back, and by the summer of 1975, a federal court had struck down the ban that was keeping him out. The road back to the presidency was suddenly open. That made him a problem. A loud, public, uncontrollable problem for the men who had gotten comfortable running things while he was gone. Frank Sheeran was dying when he decided to become the man who killed Jimmy Hoffa. Sit with that for a second. If you were at the end of your life and confessing to the biggest unsolved murder in the country was the one thing that could make the whole world finally say your name, and no prison on earth could ever reach you for it. Would you claim a killing you did not do? Tell me in the comments, because this is the exact hinge the whole story turns on. And if you are new here, subscribe. I pull these cases out of FBI files and trial records every week, and this one gets stranger the deeper you go. Because the movie gives you a clean story, and clean is the one thing this murder has never been. On the morning of July 30th, 1975, Jimmy Hoffa was not afraid. That is the detail that tells you everything. A man who was afraid does not do what Hoffa did that day. He got dressed, he told his wife Josephine he was going to a meeting, and he drove himself to the parking lot of the Machus Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, just outside Detroit. He believed he was there to make peace. He believed he was meeting Tony Provenzano, in from New Jersey, and a Detroit power named Anthony Giacalone, a man they called Tony Jack. Two heavy hitters, sitting down to smooth things over with the old boss. Hoffa trusted the invitation enough to show up alone. Nobody came. He stood in that lot in the afternoon heat, and he waited. And the longer he waited, the angrier he got. At around 2:30 in the afternoon, he found a payphone and called his wife, furious, complaining that Giacalone had stood him up. Where the hell is everybody? That call is one of the last confirmed moments of Jimmy Hoffa's life. He hung up. He went back to the lot, and James Riddle Hoffa walked off the face of the earth. His green Pontiac was found the next day, sitting unlocked in the Machus Red Fox lot. Keys gone, owner gone. He was never seen again. No body, no blood, no arrest. To this day, no grave anyone can point to. The discipline that built Jimmy Hoffa, the certainty that he could walk into any room and control it, was the exact thing that walked him into that lot alone. He was too sure of his own weight to be scared of a parking lot. There was a car in this story, and it was not Frank Sheeran's. Witnesses put a maroon Mercury in the area that afternoon, and that Mercury belonged to the son of Tony Jack Giacalone. The man behind the wheel, according to the theory the FBI chased hardest for decades, was Charles O'Brien, a teamster known to everyone as Chuckie. And Chuckie O'Brien was not some hired stranger. He was, in every way that mattered, Jimmy Hoffa's foster son. Hoffa had half-raised him. If a car pulled up to that lot carrying a face Hoffa knew and trusted, a face like Chuckie's, that would explain the one thing the whole case hangs on. Why a careful, frightened-of-nothing man got into a vehicle without a fight. The machine almost never sent strangers. Its most efficient weapon was always familiarity. Years later, in 2001, the FBI ran DNA on a hair pulled from that Mercury and matched it to Jimmy Hoffa. It was the closest thing to physical evidence the case ever produced, and it pointed at the car, and the car pointed at Chuckie. But O'Brien denied it to his last breath. He was never charged. He died in 2020, an old man in Florida, still insisting he had nothing to do with the death of the man who raised him. His own stepson, a Harvard law professor, spent years arguing Chuckie was innocent. That is the trouble with this murder in miniature. Every road that looks like it ends in a name ends instead in a denial, a maybe, a piece of evidence that suggests without proving. Within 72 hours, the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa became one of the largest FBI investigations in American history. Hundreds of agents, in Detroit, in New Jersey, in New York. And when those agents sat down to write out who they believed took Hoffa off that lot, they did not write the name Frank Sheeran at the top. They wrote a different set of names. New Jersey names. Provenzano's men. The trial transcript tells a different story than the movie does, and so does the memo that started it all. In December of 1975, the government hauled a handful of those New Jersey men into a room outside Detroit and put them in front of a federal grand jury. Salvatore Briguglio, his brother Gabriel Briguglio, Thomas Andretta. Provenzano's soldiers, all of them, ordered to explain where they were on the day Hoffa vanished. Every one of them sat down, and every one of them took the fifth. Not a word. And that silence, from those specific men, is the sound the FBI file is built on. Salvatore Briguglio. Everyone in that world called him Sally Bugs. In the movie, he is a minor figure in glasses, a soft-spoken accomplice who rides along and helps handle the details. In the federal file, he is something much larger. He He was a Genovese family soldier, a business agent for Teamsters Local 560 in New Jersey, and he answered directly to Tony Provenzano. He was, by reputation and by record, Provenzano's hand. When something needed doing in that crew, Sally Bugs did it, or made sure it got done. And when the government finally put on paper who it believed had carried out the actual killing of Jimmy Hoffa, the paper pointed at him. That was the story the public knew. The grand jury heard a different one. In 1976, the FBI compiled an internal summary of the whole investigation, an inter-office memo that agents referred to as the Hoffex memo, laying out the Bureau's working theory and its suspects. And the way that memo describes Frank Sheeran, when it describes him at all, is not the way you describe your killer. Sheeran appears as an associate of Russell Bufalino, a known figure in the Detroit area at the time, and a close friend of Hoffa's. A friend, not the triggerman. The document that the actual investigators produced files Frank Sheeran under the people Hoffa trusted, not the people who shot him. The name it treats as the hand is Briguglio's. Read that again, because the gap is the entire video. The film's shooter is the file's family friend. The film's bespectacled supporting player is the file's assassin. There was a second document, and it is even blunter. A memo out of the Justice Department's Organized Crime Strike Force, also from the 1970s, laid out the reconstruction the prosecutors were working from. In their version, Salvatore Briguglio was given the actual assignment, and afterward, he notified the interested parties that it had been completed successfully on the evening of July 30th, 1975. Given the actual assignment. That is government language, in a government file, naming the man the government believed did the thing the movie hands to Frank Sheeran. Now, honesty, because this audience does not tolerate anything less. A lot of what pointed the FBI at the Briguglios and the Andrettas came, at the root, from a single informant, a jailed Provenzano associate named Ralph Picardo, who talked in 1975 and named the crew, and even placed Sheeran at a house. And Picardo was not a clean witness. In court filings over the years, he was branded a liar, a pathological liar, a man whose word could not be trusted on its own. If the case against Sally Bugs rested only on Ralph Picardo, it would rest on sand. But it does not rest only on him. The people who bother most about this distinction are the FBI agents who worked it, and they did not need Picardo to reach the same conclusion. They watched the New Jersey crew take the fifth. They tracked the cars. They built the timeline. And decades later, when a Harvard professor named Jack Goldsmith went looking for the truth for his own reasons, he found those original agents, still alive, still certain, and asked them directly. Their answer was consistent, and it was the opposite of the movie. Every man among them said the same thing about Frank Sheeran. There is no evidence he was there. One of the lead agents on the case put it flatly. Sheeran, he said, was never on the radar screen as one of Hoffa's killers. Not a suspect they cleared, a suspect they never had. The decision to believe the movie instead of the file looks small. It is not. It rewrites who did the most infamous unsolved murder in America, and it does it on the word of one dying man over the work of hundreds of agents. The FBI dug for Jimmy Hoffa for 50 years. They dug under a horse barn. They tore up a swimming pool. They excavated a field in New Jersey and drained tips from every corner of the country, and every single one of them came back empty. And here is the part that should stop you cold. In all that searching, the one place the movie swears the murder happened got its turn too, and what they found there is the closest this case has ever come to a verdict. In 2004, a news crew chasing Sheeran's confession went to the small brick house in Detroit, where he said he shot Hoffa. 17,841 Beaverland Street, a real address, a real house, still standing, still lived in. Investigators pulled up the floorboards. They found stains. They sent samples to the FBI laboratory, dozens of them, and everyone waited to see if Frank Sheeran had finally been proven right. On February 14, 2005, the answer came back. The stains were human blood, but the blood was not Hoffa's. The lead, the police announced, was unfounded. The one physical test of Frank Sheeran's story, run against the exact house he named, on the exact floor he described, found nothing of Jimmy Hoffa at all. That is not a detail his defenders have ever really explained, and it is far from the only version of events Frank Sheeran told. This is the part the film cannot hold, because a confession that keeps changing is not a confession, it is an audition. Before he settled on the story the world now knows, Sheeran told other ones. In the mid-1990s, he claimed Hoffa was killed by contract men tied to the Nixon White House. Then he claimed it was Vietnamese mercenaries, acting on orders from the highest levels of the government. At one point, he signed a statement saying he had only helped dispose of the body, a statement his own daughter later called a forgery. He told one investigator he had shot Hoffa in a car. Only at the very end, with a book deal and a dying man's clock running, did the story become the tidy scene in the house. 2 shots behind the right ear, the gun left on the body. 5 different stories, or more, depending on how you count. The agents who watched his final taped confession were not moved. One of them, a lead investigator on the case, called it a laughable, sad, desperate attempt to create a record. A man building a monument to himself, out loud, while there was still time. In fairness, and it matters, not everyone agrees. The lawyer who wrote Sheeran's book stands behind it completely. A well-known forensic pathologist reviewed the account and said it was consistent with what evidence there was, and that it solved the mystery. There are serious people who believe Frank Sheeran told the truth in that room, but they are the minority, and they are arguing against the men who actually built the case, against a forensic test that came back empty, and against the plain fact that the story only stopped changing once it had a publisher. So if the file is right, and the man given the actual assignment was Sally Bugs Briguglio, then the obvious question is the one the movie never has to answer. Why was he never tried for it? Why did none of these men ever stand in a courtroom for the murder of Jimmy Hoffa? Because the life got to them first. On the night of March 21, 1978, Salvatore Briguglio walked out of a restaurant on Mulberry Street, in the heart of Little Italy in Manhattan. It was around 11 o'clock. 2 men in hoods stepped up to him on the sidewalk and shot him 4 times in the face and once in the chest. He was dead before he reached the hospital. The man the FBI believed had been given the assignment on Jimmy Hoffa was himself erased on a public street, right around the corner from where Crazy Joe Gallo had been gunned down years before. The timing was not an accident. Sally Bugs was facing charges in another old murder, and the fear was that he might finally talk. So the machine did to him exactly what he was suspected of doing to Hoffa. It sent men he might have known, and it closed the account. That is the pattern this whole life runs on, and the aftermath reads like a ledger with every line paid in full. Tony Provenzano, the man in prison who swore he would kill Hoffa, died behind bars in 1988, convicted in the end of a different murder, never of this one. Chuckie O'Brien, the foster son in the maroon Mercury, carried the suspicion for 45 years and died in 2020, still denying it. Frank Sheeran, the man who confessed to everything, died in 2003, a few months before his book made him famous, having never been charged with any of it. And Gabriel Briguglio, Sally Bugs's brother, named in that original FBI memo, the last living man on the Bureau's list of suspects, died at home in New Jersey in November of 2025, at 86 years old, having denied his involvement to the end. Every name the file ever pointed at is gone now. Not one of them was ever convicted of taking Jimmy Hoffa off that parking lot. The case is still, officially, open. The body has never been found. Frank Sheeran got the ending he wanted. The tape has his voice on it, steady and certain, walking a stranger through 2 shots behind the right ear, in a quiet Detroit house. The file the FBI actually built, the one with the memos and the suspects and the man who was given the assignment, never put his name in that room at all. One of them was recorded to be believed. The other was written down to be true. The reels stopped turning in 2003. The file is still open.